General Marcus Kane stood in the wreckage of what had once been the civilian colony of New Haven. The metallic stench of blood, mixed with the acrid smoke from burning structures, filled his nostrils. Bodies lay scattered across the settlement's main plaza, their lifeless eyes staring at the alien sky above. Men, women, children, none had been spared. The Zephyrian Empire's Fourth Fleet had made sure of that. Kane knelt beside the body of a young girl, no more than 8 years old. Her small hand still clutched a toy spaceship, one of the old Earth designs his own daughter used to play with. The rage that had been building in his chest since receiving the distress signal 12 hours ago, finally, crystallized into something cold and hard. "Sir," Lieutenant Sarah Chun approached cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. She had seen that look in the general's eyes before, but never quite this intense. The reconnaissance teams are reporting similar scenes across all 7 settlements. No survivors. Kane rose slowly, his weathered face a mask of controlled fury. At 52, he had spent the better part of 3 decades fighting wars across the galaxy. He had followed the galactic rules of engagement religiously, even when it cost human lives. The rules were meant to keep warfare civilized, to prevent the kind of wholesale slaughter that had once plagued Earth's history. But the Zephyrians had just proven those rules were nothing more than pretty words on paper. How many? Kane asked, though he already knew the answer would be devastating. Preliminary count suggests 43,000 civilians, sir. The Zephyrians hit the settlements simultaneously during the morning hours when most people would be going about their daily routines. No warning, no demand for surrender. They just opened fire. Kane turned toward the horizon where the smoking remains of the nearby farming district painted dark streaks across the orange sky. New Haven had been humanity's most successful agricultural colony in the Outer Rim, a testament to human ingenuity and determination. Families had come here seeking a better life, fleeing the overcrowded worlds of the inner systems. They had found peace, prosperity, and now death. Any word from command? Kane asked, knowing the politicians back on Earth would be scrambling to find a diplomatic solution. They always were. Admiral Harrison sends his condolences and requests a full report. The Senate is calling an emergency session to discuss our response. Chun paused, reading from her tablet. They're also reminding us that any retaliation must be proportional and in accordance with the Galactic Accords. Kane's laugh was bitter and without humor. Proportional. The bugs slaughter 43,000 innocent people, and we're supposed to respond proportionally. He kicked a piece of debris from a destroyed home. What would that be, Lieutenant? Kill 43,000 of their civilians? Maybe we should ask permission first. Make sure we file the proper paperwork. Chun had served under Kane for 8 years, long enough to recognize the dangerous edge in his voice. The general was known for his tactical brilliance and his adherence to military protocol. But she had also heard the stories from the Proxima campaign, where Kane had bent more than a few rules to save his troops. This felt different, though. This felt like something was breaking inside the man who had become a legend in the Human Defense Force. Sir, I know this is difficult, but we need to consider what? Kane's voice cut through the air like a blade. That maybe if we ask nicely enough, the Zephyrians will promise not to murder any more of our people. That if we follow their rules closely enough, they'll suddenly develop a conscience. He gestured toward the ruins around them. These people followed the rules, Lieutenant. They were non-combatants living on a declared agricultural world under full galactic protection status. The Zephyrians knew exactly what they were doing when they came here. This wasn't a military target. This was a message. Kane began walking toward the colony's former administrative center, where his field command post was being established. Chun fell into step beside him, her boots crunching on broken glass and scattered personal belongings. A child's drawing fluttered past them in the wind, depicting a family standing in front of a house under a smiling sun. What kind of message, sir? That they don't see us as equals worthy of the same protections they expect for themselves. Kane's jaw tightened. That human life is cheap, expendable. That we're just another species to be conquered or eliminated as they see fit. The administrative building had taken a direct hit from orbital bombardment, but the basement levels were intact. Kane's staff had managed to establish communication arrays and tactical displays in what had once been the colony's emergency shelter. Ironic, considering how little protection it had ultimately provided. Major Rodriguez, Kane's intelligence officer, looked up from a holographic display showing ship movements across the sector. General, we've got confirmation from deep space sensors. The Zephyrian 4th Fleet is withdrawing toward their base at Kepler Station. They're not even trying to hold the system. Of course they're not, Kane replied, studying the tactical readout. Why would they? They got what they came for. A demonstration of power, a lesson for any other species thinking of challenging their expansion. He pointed to the display showing Zephyrian fleet positions. How long would it take to intercept them? Rodriguez looked surprised. Sir, our orders were to secure the system and investigate the attack. The fleet command hasn't authorized any pursuit operations. Kane moved to the central display, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The strategic map expanded, showing not just the immediate system, but the broader region where human and Zephyrian territories intersected. For years, this border had been stable, maintained through careful diplomacy and mutual respect for established boundaries. General, Chun said carefully, if we're thinking about retaliation, we need to go through proper channels. The rules of engagement require the rules of engagement. Kane's voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made everyone in the room stop what they were doing. Tell me, Lieutenant, what do the rules of engagement say about the deliberate targeting of civilian populations? They're strictly forbidden under Article 12 of the Galactic Accords. Any force that engages in such actions forfeits their protection. Kane nodded slowly. So by their own actions, the Zephyrian 4th Fleet has placed itself outside the bounds of civilized warfare. He turned to face his assembled staff, which means we're no longer bound to treat them according to those same rules. The implications of that statement hung heavy in the recycled air of the underground command post. For decades, human military doctrine had been built around the Galactic Accords, a set of agreements that governed warfare between spacefaring species. The rules had prevented the kind of total war that had nearly destroyed Earth centuries ago. But they only worked if all sides honored them. Sir, Major Rodriguez said slowly, are you suggesting we abandon the Accords entirely? Kane was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on an image of New Haven as it had been just yesterday. Bustling with life, children playing in the streets, farmers tending their crops under the alien sun. Then, he looked around the room at the faces of his officers, each of them waiting for his answer. I'm suggesting that the Zephyrians have already abandoned them, he said finally, and that it's time we acknowledge that reality. Kane moved to the communications console. Rodriguez, I want a complete tactical assessment of Zephyrian military assets within 50 light years. Chun, contact our deep space reconnaissance units. I want to know the exact location and strength of every bug ship in this sector. General, Chun said, without specific orders from Fleet Command. Kane's hand slammed down on the console with enough force to make several officers jump. 43,000 people, Lieutenant. 43,000 human beings who woke up yesterday morning thinking they were safe under the protection of interstellar law. His voice rose with each word. They're dead because I followed orders. Because I believe in a system that treats us like second-class citizens in our own galaxy. He turned to face the room again, and Chin saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. It wasn't just anger or even hatred. It was a fundamental shift in the man's worldview, as if some essential part of Marcus Kane had been burned away in the ruins above. The bugs want to play by different rules? Kane said quietly. Then, let's play by different rules. But they picked the wrong species to start this game with. They have no idea what humans are capable of when we stop being civilized. Kane activated the secure communication array, knowing that his next words would likely end his military career and possibly start a war that would reshape the galaxy. But as he thought of the little girl with the toy spaceship, of the families who would never see their loved ones again, he found he didn't care about the consequences. This is General Marcus Kane of the Human Defense Force. He began, his voice carrying across light years to reach every human military installation in known space. As of this moment, I am declaring the Galactic Accords null and void in all conflicts involving the Zephyrian Empire. They have chosen to abandon the rules of civilized warfare. We will accommodate them. The silence in the command post was deafening. Chen looked around at the other officers, seeing her own shock reflected in their faces. What Kane was proposing went against everything they had been taught, everything the Human Defense Force stood for. Sir, she said carefully, the consequences of this decision will be severe, Kane finished for her. For the bugs, he turned back to the tactical display, already beginning to formulate plans that would have been unthinkable just hours ago. They wanted to send us a message with this massacre. Well, message received. Now it's time to send them one back. Kane's fingers moved across the tactical interface, bringing up deployment schedules and resource allocations. The Human Defense Force had been built for defensive operations, designed to protect human worlds and shipping lanes. But buried in its doctrine were older strategies, tactics that hark back to humanity's bloodier past. Strategies that had been deemed too extreme for use against civilized opponents. The Zephyrians think they understand humans, Kane continued, his voice growing colder with each word. They've studied our history, our culture, our military capabilities. But they've made one critical error in their calculations. What's that, sir? Rodriguez asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Kane looked up from the display, and in that moment, Chen realized she was no longer looking at the same man who had arrived at New Haven that morning. This version of Marcus Kane had been forged in the ashes of 43,000 innocent lives, tempered by rage and shaped by a determination she had never seen before. They think our adherence to their rules is a sign of weakness, Kane said. They're about to learn that it was mercy, and mercy is a luxury we can no longer afford. 3 days after the New Haven massacre, the human frigate Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. Captain Diana Reeves watched the sensor readings with grim satisfaction as her tactical officer confirmed what their deep space reconnaissance had suggested. The Zephyrian 4th Fleet was exactly where intelligence said it would be, refueling at their forward operating base. 27 ships, Lieutenant Commander Hayes reported from his station. 12 destroyers, 8 cruisers, 6 dreadnoughts, and 1 command carrier. They're in standard defensive formation around the station. Reeves nodded, her fingers drumming against the arm of her captain's chair. The Retribution was alone, a single frigate against a fleet that could have reduced it to scrap metal in minutes under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Not anymore. Any response to our presence? She asked. Negative, Captain. We're well outside their sensor range. They have no idea we're here. That was exactly what General Kane had been counting on when he'd selected Reeves for this mission. The Retribution was one of the newest ships in the Human Defense Force, equipped with experimental stealth systems that could hide it from most alien sensors. It had been designed for reconnaissance work, not combat operations. But Kane's new rules of engagement had changed everything. Signal the General, Reeves ordered. Tell him the package has been delivered. The package in question was currently floating in the cargo bay of the Retribution, a prototype device that had been under development by human military research for the past 5 years. The scientists had called it a gravitational resonance disruptor, though the troops had given it a simpler name, the Planet Cracker. It was designed to destabilize the gravitational field of large celestial bodies, in theory allowing mining operations to break apart asteroids more efficiently. In practice, it could do much worse than that. Reeves had read the technical specifications 3 times, barely believing what she was seeing. The device could create a cascading gravitational collapse in any object larger than a small moon. The Zephyrian base was built into a large asteroid, one that contained several million tons of refined metals and enough stored fuel to supply a major fleet operation. Captain, Hayes said quietly, are you sure about this? The base has to have civilian contractors, maybe even families of the military personnel. Reeves turned to look at her tactical officer, a young man who had graduated from the academy just 2 years ago. He was a good officer, but he still thought like someone who had grown up believing in the rules of civilized warfare. 3 days ago, she might have shared his concerns. Lieutenant Commander, how many civilians were on New Haven when the bugs hit it? Hayes' jaw tightened. 43,000, ma'am. And how many of them did the Zephyrians allow to evacuate before they opened fire? None, ma'am. Then, I suggest you remember that when you're questioning our orders. Reeves stood from her chair and walked to the main view screen, where the distant glow of Kepler Station was barely visible against the star field. The bugs wanted to change the rules of engagement. Well, congratulations to them. They succeeded. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of ship systems and the occasional beep from monitoring stations. Reeves knew what her crew was thinking because she had thought the same things herself when Kane had first outlined his mission. They were about to cross a line that humanity had never crossed before, at least not since they had joined the Galactic community. They were about to become the kind of species that other worlds warned their children about in bedtime stories. Ma'am, The communications officer spoke up. "We're receiving a priority transmission from General Kane." "Put it through to my ready room," Reeves said. She needed to hear Kane's final confirmation before proceeding. Not because she doubted the orders, but because she wanted to make sure the man giving them understood exactly what he was asking her to do. Kane's image flickered to life on her private terminal, the general's face looking even more haggard than it had during their last conversation. Behind him, she could see the ongoing cleanup efforts at New Haven, teams of soldiers and medical personnel working to process the aftermath of the massacre. "Captain Reeves," Kane said without preamble. "Status report. In position and ready to proceed, sir. The target is confirmed as the Zephyrian 4th Fleet Base at coordinates you specified. I estimate they have approximately 3,000 military personnel on station, plus an unknown number of support staff." Kane was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting to something off-camera. Reeves realized he was probably looking at another report from the investigation teams on New Haven, another catalog of atrocities committed against defenseless humans. "Captain, I want to be absolutely clear about what we're doing here," Kane said finally. "This is not a surgical strike against a military installation. This is not a proportional response designed to send a diplomatic message. This is the first step in teaching the Zephyrian Empire that there are consequences for murdering human civilians." "Understand, sir. Do you?" Kane leaned forward, his eyes boring into the camera. "Because once you activate that device, there's no going back. The galactic community will label us as monsters. The other species will unite against us out of fear. We will become the thing that everyone in the galaxy warns their children about." Reeves considered her words carefully. "Sir, with respect, I think we became that the moment the bugs decided to slaughter 43,000 innocent people, and we did nothing meaningful in response. At least this way, the next time they consider targeting human civilians, they'll remember what happened to Kepler Station." Kane's expression shifted slightly, and Reeves thought she saw approval in his eyes. "Proceed with the mission, Captain." And Reeves, "Yes, sir. Make sure every sensor in the system records what happens next. I want the bugs to have crystal clear footage of what we're capable of when they push us too far." The transmission ended, leaving Reeves alone with her thoughts and the weight of what she was about to do. She had joined the Human Defense Force to protect her species, to serve as a shield between humanity and the hostile universe beyond their borders. She had never imagined she would become the sword that struck back. But as she thought of the images from New Haven, the children's bodies in the streets, the families torn apart by Zephyrian disruptor fire, she found her resolve hardening. The galaxy had rules about civilized warfare, and humanity had followed those rules religiously. But the bugs had just proven that those rules only applied when all sides respected them. Reeves returned to the bridge and took her position in the captain's chair. Around her, the crew went about their duties with professional efficiency, but she could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew this mission was different. Everyone understood what they were about to unleash. "Helm, take us to the deployment coordinates," she ordered. "Full stealth. I want us to be completely invisible until the moment we activate." "Aye, Captain." The Retribution moved silently through space, its advanced hull coating and electronic countermeasures rendering it effectively invisible to the Zephyrian sensors. As they approached the calculated deployment point, Reeves could see the enemy base growing larger on the main screen. It was an impressive installation carved into the heart of a metallic asteroid and surrounded by defensive platforms and docking facilities. In a few minutes, all of it would be gone. "Captain," the science officer reported, "we're at optimal deployment range. Gravitational resonance disruptor is powered and ready for activation." Reeves looked around the bridge one last time, seeing her own determination reflected in the faces of her crew. These were good people, trained to protect and serve. But they were also human, and they had seen what happened when humanity tried to play by rules that their enemies ignored. Engineering confirmed device deployment. "Device deployed and positioned, Captain. Gravitational field generators are online and building charge." Through the view screen, Reeves could see the tiny speck of the disruptor device, invisible to the naked eye, but tracked perfectly by their sensors. It was positioned at exactly the right point to create maximum gravitational disruption throughout the asteroid's core structure. "Sir," Hayes said quietly, "long-range sensors are picking up increased activity around the base. It looks like they're preparing to launch additional patrols." Reeves nodded. The Zephyrians were probably feeling confident after their successful massacre at New Haven. They thought they had sent a clear message to humanity about the price of resistance. They had no idea that message was about to be returned with interest. All stations, prepare for immediate departure following device activation, Reeves commanded. We'll have approximately 4 minutes before the gravitational cascade becomes irreversible, and I don't want to be anywhere near this system when it collapses. She activated the communications system, opening a direct channel to the Zephyrian base. This part hadn't been in Kane's original orders, but Reeves felt the bugs deserved to know who was responsible for what was about to happen to them. Zephyrian 4th Fleet. This is Captain Diana Reeves of the Human Defense Force vessel Retribution. 3 days ago, your forces murdered 43,000 innocent civilians on New Haven. You broke the rules of civilized warfare and showed us that mercy is weakness. Consider this our reply. She closed the channel before the aliens could respond and turned to her weapons officer. Activate the gravitational resonance disruptor. Full power. The device came alive with energies that warped space itself around the asteroid base. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The Zephyrian ships continued their patrol patterns. The base showed no signs of distress. But Reeves knew that deep in the asteroid's core, fundamental forces were beginning to work against each other in ways that nature had never intended. Gravitational field destabilization confirmed, the science officer reported. Cascade effect beginning to propagate through the target's core structure. Time to critical collapse. 3 minutes, 47 seconds. Reeves watched the tactical display as the first signs of the device's effects became visible. The asteroid base began to shudder, its surface buckling as competing gravitational forces tore at its internal structure. Debris started breaking away from the station's outer hull, and she could see emergency lights beginning to flash across the installation. The Zephyrian fleet responded exactly as their doctrine predicted, moving to defensive positions around the base while trying to identify the source of the attack. Their sensors swept the area frantically, but the Retribution remained invisible to their detection systems. Captain, communications reported, we're receiving multiple emergency transmissions from a base. They're calling for immediate evacuation assistance. How nice for them, Reeves replied coldly. Did they offer evacuation assistance to the children of New Haven before they opened fire? The asteroid was coming apart now, massive chunks of rock and metal spinning away from the central mass as the gravitational field collapsed in on itself. The Zephyrian ships tried desperately to move clear, but several were caught in the expanding debris field. Reeves watched without emotion as a destroyer was crushed by a piece of the station's outer ring. 2 minutes to critical cascade, the science officer announced. Helm, prepare for emergency departure. Maximum acceleration the moment I give the word. Reeves continued watching the destruction unfold, memorizing every detail for the report she would file when they returned to human space. This was history in the making, the moment when humanity stopped pretending that their enemies shared their values and started fighting back with the same ruthlessness that had been used against them. The asteroid base collapsed inward with a violence that was almost beautiful to watch. Gravitational forces that should have taken millions of years to develop were compressed into mere minutes, creating a localized phenomenon that tore apart matter at the atomic level. The Zephyrian command carrier, too close to escape the expanding field of destruction, was pulled inexorably toward the collapsing mass. Reeves could imagine the panic on that ship as its crew realized what was happening to them. She thought of the families on New Haven who had experienced their own moments of terror as Zephyrian weapons targeted their homes. The comparison didn't make her feel guilty. It made her feel satisfied. Critical cascade achieved, the science officer reported. The gravitational field is now self-sustaining. Even if we wanted to stop it, we couldn't. Helm, get us out of here. Maximum burn. The Retribution leaped away from the dying system like a bullet from a gun, its engines straining to put distance between the ship and the expanding zone of gravitational chaos. Behind them, Kepler Station and the Zephyrian 4th Fleet ceased to exist in any meaningful sense, consumed by forces that reduced matter itself to its component particles. As they reached safe distance and prepared to jump to hyperspace, Reeves allowed herself one last look at the tactical display. Where the asteroid base had been, there was now only a slowly dissipating cloud of exotic particles and twisted space-time. 27 Zephyrian ships and 3,000 alien military personnel had been erased from existence in less than 5 minutes. It was a good start. "Captain," Hayes said quietly, "how do we explain this in our after-action report? The method we used, the scale of destruction?" Reeves considered the question as she watched the last traces of Kepler Station fade from their sensors. "We tell the truth, Lieutenant Commander. The bugs wanted to play a new kind of war. We're simply better at it than they expected." She turned to face her bridge crew. "And this is just the beginning. Before we're done, every Zephyrian in the galaxy is going to know exactly what happens when you murder human civilians." The Retribution disappeared into hyperspace, carrying news of the first human victory in what would become known as the War of No Quarter. Behind them, space itself slowly healed from the wounds they had inflicted, but the message they had sent would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity had finally stopped playing by the rules, and the universe would never be the same. Admiral Zektar Hive Prime stood before the holographic display in the command center of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet, his 4 arms moving in the ritual patterns of disbelief and rage that had been programmed into a species' behavioral matrix for millennia. The images cycling through the display showed the complete destruction of Kepler Station and the Fourth Fleet, reduced to nothing more than scattered particles and twisted spacetime. "Explain to me," he said in the clicking, chittering language of his people, "how 27 ships and a fully fortified base station simply ceased to exist." Chief Science Coordinator Velmoth's mandibles clicked nervously as she manipulated the tactical readouts. "The gravitational signatures suggest the use of a weaponized field disruptor, Hive Prime. The asteroid's core structure was destabilized at the quantum level, creating a cascading collapse that consumed everything within a 30-kilometer radius. And the humans possess such technology?" "Apparently so, Hive Prime. Our intelligence assessments clearly underestimated their technological capabilities." Velmoth paused, her compound eyes reflecting the blue glow of the holographic display. "The device used was far beyond anything we believe they had developed. It represents a fundamental advancement in gravitational manipulation that our own scientists have only theorized about." Zektar's primary arms clenched into fists while his secondary appendages continued their agitated patterns. In the 300 years since the Zephyrian Empire had begun expanding beyond their home system, they had encountered dozens of species. Most had submitted to imperial rule without significant resistance once they understood the futility of opposing Zephyrian military superiority. Others had fought briefly before accepting their place in the natural order of things. Humans had been different from the start. They possessed an unusual combination of technological innovation and stubborn independence that had made them valuable as autonomous allies rather than conquered subjects. The arrangement had worked well for decades, with humanity providing advanced technology and the Zephyrians offering protection and access to galactic trade networks. But the humans had been growing too confident lately, establishing colonies and systems that the Empire considered part of its natural expansion zone. The attack on New Haven had been intended as a simple demonstration of Imperial authority, a reminder that even autonomous allies needed to understand their place in the galactic hierarchy. Instead, it had apparently awakened something that the Empire's intelligence services had failed to recognize. "Show me the transmission again," Zektar commanded. The display shifted to show the recorded message from the human frigate that had somehow approached Kepler Station undetected. The female human's voice carried an emotional resonance that Zektar found disturbing. Zephyrians were logical beings who made decisions based on calculated outcomes and imperial needs. This human spoke with the kind of passionate hatred that suggested they were no longer thinking rationally. 3 days ago, your forces murdered 43,000 innocent civilians on New Haven. You broke the rules of civilized warfare and showed us that mercy is weakness. Consider this our reply." The message ended, and the display returned to showing the gravitational anomaly that had consumed an entire Zephyrian fleet. Zektar studied the readings with growing concern. The destruction at Kepler Station hadn't been a surgical strike against military assets. It had been total annihilation, the kind of overwhelming response that suggested the humans were no longer interested in proportional retaliation. Hive Prime, Fleet Coordinator Kextai approached with the characteristic submissive posture required when addressing a superior. "We have received initial reports from our intelligence assets in human space. Their military is mobilizing forces across multiple sectors. How extensive? Preliminary estimates suggest they are activating reserve fleets that have been in mothball status for decades. Their industrial output has also shifted dramatically toward military production. Get type Bao set. Hive Prime. The humans appear to be preparing for a full-scale war. Zektar's compound eyes focused on the fleet coordinator with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. One frigate destroyed an entire base and fleet using a previously unknown superweapon, and now their entire species is mobilizing for war. What does this suggest to you about human psychology, Kextai? That we may have miscalculated their response to the New Haven operation, Hive Prime. Indeed, Zektar turned back to the tactical display, his mind working through the implications. The humans have apparently decided that the Galactic Accords no longer apply to their conflicts with the Empire. They have chosen to abandon the rules of civilized warfare. His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Very well. If they wish to revert to a more primitive form of conflict resolution, we shall accommodate them. The command center fell silent, except for the background hum of ship systems and the quiet clicking of Zephyrian communication. Zektar's staff knew that tone, had seen it when the Admiral was planning the subjugation of other species. It usually preceded the deployment of overwhelming force designed to break an enemy's will to resist. Velmoth, what is the current status of our 7th and 9th fleets? Both are at full operational capacity. Hive Prime. The 7th is currently stationed at Proxima Base with 147 ships. The 9th is conducting patrol operations in the Outer Rim with 93 vessels. Excellent. And what human targets would inflict maximum psychological damage while demonstrating the cost of their recent aggression? Velmoth manipulated the strategic display, highlighting human colonies and industrial installations throughout their territory. The agricultural worlds would seem the most logical choice, Hive Prime. Earth's population depends heavily on food production from their colony planets. Destroying several of their major farming systems would create shortages that would pressure their government to seek negotiations. No. Zektar's response was immediate and decisive. Agricultural targets were the old strategy, designed to send measured messages while leaving room for diplomatic resolution. The humans have demonstrated that they no longer wish to receive measured messages. The Admiral moved to the central command console, his 4 arms working simultaneously across multiple interfaces. The tactical display expanded to show the entire human-controlled region of space, with detailed information about industrial capacity, population centers, and military installations. The humans value their civilians above all else, Zektar continued. It is both their greatest strength and their most exploitable weakness. When we eliminated 43,000 of them at New Haven, they responded by eliminating an entire military base. The ratio suggests they consider their non-combatant population to be worth approximately 70 military personnel each. Kextai's mandibles clicked uncertainly. Hive Prime, are you suggesting we target additional civilian populations? The Galactic Council has already expressed concern about the New Haven operation. Further attacks against non-combatants might provoke intervention from other species. Let them intervene, Zektar said dismissively. The Empire has maintained its position through strength, not through the approval of lesser species. If the other races wish to protect humanity's civilian population, they are welcome to try. He highlighted several systems on the display. These are humanity's 3 largest population centers outside their home system. Combined, they house approximately 12 million humans. The silence in the command center was profound. Even among a species known for their pragmatic approach to warfare, the scale of destruction being proposed was exceptional. Velmoth was the first to find her voice. Hive Prime, eliminating 12 million civilians would represent an escalation far beyond anything in recorded galactic history. The response from other species will be irrelevant once humanity is no longer a factor in galactic politics, Zektar interrupted. The humans have chosen to abandon the rules of civilized warfare. Very well. Let them discover what uncivilized warfare looks like when practiced by a species with 300 years of experience in subjugating other races. The Admiral activated the fleet-wide communication system, preparing to address every Zephyrian ship captain in the region. This would be the largest military operation the Empire had undertaken in 50 years, requiring coordination between multiple fleets and the deployment of weapons that have been held in reserve since the conquest of the Andromedan Collective. All fleet commanders, this is Hive Prime Zektar speaking. The human species has committed acts of unprovoked aggression against Imperial assets, destroying Kepler Station, and the Fourth Fleet using weapons of mass destruction in violation of all galactic conventions. They have chosen to abandon the accords that have maintained peace in our region for decades. He paused, allowing his words to reach every ship in the Imperial fleet. Thousands of Zephyrian officers were listening, waiting for their orders. Many had participated in the New Haven operation and understood the context of current events. The Empire's response will be swift, decisive, and proportional to the threat posed by human expansionism. Operation Swarm Descent is now authorized. All reserves are being mobilized immediately. Target priorities are as follows. Humanity's 3 largest population centers are to be completely sterilized using planetary bombardment protocols. No survivors. No exceptions. The communication ended, and the command center erupted in activity as staff officers began coordinating the largest military operation in recent Imperial history. Zektar watched the preparations with satisfaction, confident that the humans would quickly reconsider their position once they realized the true cost of defying Imperial authority. Hive Prime, Velmoth approached cautiously. The science data from Kepler Station suggests the humans may possess additional superweapons beyond the gravitational disruptor. If they deploy similar devices against our fleet formations, then we will lose ships, Zektar acknowledged. The Empire has 12,000 vessels under arms, while humanity fields fewer than 800. Even if their new weapons prove highly effective, simple mathematics favors our position. His compound eyes fixed on the tactical display, showing human territory. Besides, our intelligence suggests they possessed only a limited number of these gravitational devices. The destruction of Kepler Station may have exhausted their entire stockpile. It was a reasonable assumption based on the available data. Most species required years to develop and deploy truly revolutionary weapons technology. The gravitational disruptor represented such an advancement that it seemed unlikely the humans could have manufactured more than a few prototypes. Zektar was about to learn that reasonable assumptions often proved fatally inadequate when dealing with a species that had just decided to stop being reasonable. Fleet status report, he commanded. 7th Fleet is beginning departure from Proxima Base, Kextai reported. Estimated arrival at first target in 18 hours. 9th Fleet is repositioning for coordinated strikes on the remaining targets. Total force commitment, 240 ships, including 6 Dreadnought-class vessels equipped with planetary bombardment systems. Excellent. And what is the status of human fleet movements? Scattered across multiple systems, Hive Prime. Their forces appear to be in disarray following our New Haven demonstration. Intelligence suggests they are still attempting to organize a coherent response to Imperial pressure. Zektar's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The humans had made their gesture of defiance by destroying Kepler Station, but now they would learn the price of challenging a species that had conquered half the galaxy through superior organization and overwhelming force. The tactical display updated to show Imperial fleet movements, red icons representing Zephyrian ships moving toward their assigned targets with mechanical precision. Each fleet was equipped with enough firepower to reduce entire planets to lifeless rock, and their orders were explicit: complete extermination of human population centers. Hive Prime Communications reported, "We are receiving a transmission from the human government on Earth. They are requesting immediate negotiations to prevent further escalation." "Ignore it," Zektar commanded. The time for negotiations ended when they chose to deploy weapons of mass destruction against Imperial assets. The humans will learn that defying the Empire carries consequences beyond their imagination. He turned back to the strategic display, already imagining the moment when news of humanity's destruction would spread throughout the galaxy. Other species would remember what happened to those who challenged Imperial authority, and the Zephyrian Empire would continue its expansion unhindered by stubborn human independence. What Zektar didn't know was that the scattered human fleet movements his intelligence was reporting weren't signs of disorganization. They were deployment patterns for a coordinated operation that would fundamentally change the nature of warfare in their region of space. General Kane had spent the 3 days since New Haven doing more than just authorizing the destruction of Kepler Station. He had been preparing for exactly the kind of escalation that the Zephyrians were now initiating, and his response would prove that humans had learned more from galactic warfare than their enemies suspected. The Empire was about to discover that when humans decided to abandon the rules of civilization, they became very good at being uncivilized indeed. Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood in the observation deck of the battleship Vengeance, watching through reinforced viewports as the Zephyrian 7th Fleet approached the outer edges of the Harmony system. The alien formation was impressive, 147 ships moving in perfect coordination, their hulls gleaming under the light of the system's twin stars. In 12 hours, those same ships would begin the orbital bombardment of Harmony Prime, home to 4 million human civilians. Except they wouldn't live long enough to reach the planet. Colonel, Lieutenant Torres called from the tactical station behind her. All ships report ready. Operation Righteous Fury is cleared for execution. Mitchell nodded, though her attention remained focused on the approaching enemy fleet. 3 days of frantic preparation had led to this moment. Ever since General Kane had transmitted his new rules of engagement to every human military installation in known space. The message had been simple. The Zephyrians wanted total war, and humanity was prepared to give it to them. "What's the count on gravitational disruptors?" she asked. 43 devices deployed and armed across 17 ships, Torres replied. Engineering reports all systems functioning within normal parameters. Mitchell smiled grimly. The alien intelligence services had made a critical error in their assessment of human industrial capacity. They assumed that because humanity had only used one gravitational disruptor at Kepler Station, it represented the extent of their capabilities. They didn't understand that humans had been mass-producing the devices for 2 years, ever since their scientists had perfected the technology. The Zephyrians also didn't understand human strategic thinking. Kane hadn't revealed the full extent of their capabilities because he had been hoping to avoid exactly this kind of escalation. But once the bugs had chosen to target civilian populations on a massive scale, all restraints were off. Communication from Admiral Harrison, the communications officer, reported. He's requesting final confirmation of target priorities. Tell the Admiral that target priorities remain unchanged, Mitchell replied. Every Zephyrian ship in this system is to be eliminated. No survivors, no prisoners, no quarter given. She turned from the viewport to face her bridge crew. Gentlemen, today we demonstrate to the galaxy what happens when a species decides to make war on humanity. 43,000 innocent people died at New Haven. 12 million more would die if we allow this fleet to reach the inner planets. That ends here. The tactical display showed the positioning of human forces throughout the Harmony system. To the approaching Zephyrians, it would look like a desperate last stand. 18 human ships attempting to defend their homeworld against overwhelming odds. What they couldn't detect were the additional 37 vessels hiding in the asteroid fields, their stealth systems masking their presence until the moment of attack. "Colonel," Torres said, "the bugs are transmitting what appears to be a surrender demand. Put it through." The main screen flickered to show the bridge of a Zephyrian dreadnought, where a massive insectoid figure was addressing the camera. Admiral Zektar's voice came through the translation systems with mechanical precision. "Human vessels, you are significantly outgunned and outnumbered. Withdraw from this system immediately, and your ships will be allowed to retreat. Failure to comply will result in your complete destruction, followed by the sterilization of all population centers in this system." Mitchell moved to stand directly in front of the camera, making sure her face was clearly visible to the alien commander. "Admiral Zektar, this is Colonel Sarah Mitchell of the Human Defense Force. I have a counterproposal. Withdraw your forces from human space immediately, and we'll allow 10% of your fleet to return home with news of what happened here. Refuse, and we'll demonstrate why attacking human civilians was the last mistake your species will ever make." Zektar's mandibles clicked in what the translation system interpreted as amusement. "Colonel, you command 18 ships against 147. Your bravado is admirable but irrelevant. This is your final warning." "No," Mitchell replied coldly. "This is yours." She cut the transmission and turned to her weapons officer. "Signal all ships. Execute Operation Righteous Fury." What happened next would be studied in military academies for centuries to come, analyzed as the moment when humanity demonstrated their true capacity for systematic destruction. The hidden human ships emerged from the asteroid fields simultaneously, their gravitational disruptors already charged and targeted at the Zephyrian formation. But the gravitational weapons were only part of the strategy. Human military doctrine had evolved far beyond simple superweapons. They had studied every major space battle in galactic history, learning from the tactical innovations of dozens of species. When those lessons were combined with human creativity and industrial capacity, the result was devastating. "Contact!" Torres shouted as the tactical display exploded with new sensor readings. 43 gravitational disruptors firing simultaneously. The effect on the Zephyrian formation was immediate and catastrophic. Ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly found themselves caught in overlapping gravitational fields that tore at their hull integrity. But instead of creating the localized collapses that had destroyed Kepler Station, these devices had been calibrated for a different purpose. Gravitational anchors established, the science officer reported. Enemy fleet mobility reduced by 97%. They're trapped in our fire zones. Mitchell watched with professional satisfaction as the Zephyrian ships struggled against the gravitational fields holding them in place. The Bugs were excellent tactical fighters when they could maneuver freely, using their superior numbers to overwhelm smaller forces. But humanity had just removed maneuverability from the equation. "Phase 2, she commanded. "All ships, initiate concentrated bombardment. Target the command vessels first." The human fleet opened fire with weapons that hadn't existed 6 months ago, the product of crash research programs initiated after intelligence suggested the Zephyrians were planning major operations against human space. Particle beam arrays that could punch through any known armor. Quantum torpedo systems that created localized space-time distortions. Plasma cannons that turned enemy hulls into expanding clouds of superheated gas. Admiral Zektar is attempting to transmit, communications reported. "Put him through. I want him to see this." The Zephyrian commander appeared on screen again, but this time his perfect composure had cracked. Behind him, Mitchell could see his bridge crew working frantically at their stations while damage reports scrolled across their displays. "Colonel Mitchell, we are prepared to negotiate the withdrawal of Imperial forces from this system. Your demonstration of superior firepower has been noted and will be reported to the High Command." Mitchell's laugh was cold and without humor. "Admiral, 6 hours ago your forces were planning to murder 4 million innocent humans on Harmony Prime. Did you really think we would stop at negotiations once you crossed that line? The Imperial forces were acting according to military doctrine. Your military doctrine includes the systematic extermination of civilian populations," Mitchell interrupted. "Our military doctrine includes the systematic extermination of any force that threatens human civilians. Guess which one is more effective?" She gestured toward the tactical display, where the once mighty Zephyrian fleet was being methodically destroyed. "Look around you, Admiral. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't a demonstration. This is an execution." The transmission cut to static as the Zephyrian flagship suffered a catastrophic hull breach. Mitchell watched the massive ship break apart under concentrated fire from 3 human cruisers, its crew dying in the vacuum of space just as the civilians of New Haven had died under Zephyrian bombardment. "Colonel," Torres called out, "we're detecting escape pods launching from several enemy vessels." "Orders." The question hung in the air of the bridge, and Mitchell realized that every human officer was waiting to see how far their new doctrine of total warfare would extend. Under the old rules of engagement, enemy personnel and lifeboats were automatically considered non-combatants, protected by the same galactic conventions that had failed to save the families of New Haven. What did the Zephyrians do with the civilian escape shuttles from New Haven? Mitchell asked quietly. Torres checked his console. According to the after-action reports, they targeted them specifically. No sobrevivers. Then, we follow their example, Mitchell decided. All escape pods are designated as valid targets. No survivors, no prisoners, no quarter. The bridge fell silent except for the tactical reports as human weapons systematically eliminated every Zephyrian lifeboat attempting to flee the battle zone. It was a decision that would haunt some of the crew for the rest of their lives, but it was also a decision that sent an unmistakable message to every alien species monitoring the engagement. Humanity had fundamentally changed the rules of warfare, and they were very good at playing by the new rules. "Time to complete destruction of enemy formation?" Mitchell asked. "Estimated 47 minutes at current rate of fire," Torres replied. The gravitational anchors are preventing any coordinated retreat. They can't maneuver to escape our kill zones. Mitchell nodded, watching as another Zephyrian cruiser exploded under concentrated bombardment. The alien ships were well-designed and heavily armored, but they had been built for a different kind of warfare. They were designed to fight enemies who followed the Galactic Accords, who limited their targeting to military assets and avoided weapons of mass destruction. Humanity had just proven that those limitations were self-imposed rather than technological. When humans decided to abandon restraint, they became capable of innovations that terrified even themselves. "Colonel," the communications officer called, "we're receiving transmissions from the other target systems. Operations at Kepler Prime and New Geneva report similar success rates. Enemy fleets eliminated with minimal human casualties." Mitchell smiled for the first time since the battle began. Kane's coordinated strikes were succeeding beyond their most optimistic projections. 3 major Zephyrian fleets had been lured into attacking what appeared to be defenseless human colonies, only to discover that humanity had been preparing for exactly this scenario. "What about the Ninth Fleet?" she asked. "Any word on their disposition?" "Admiral Chun reports that the Ninth Fleet never reached their target system," Torres replied. "They were intercepted by deep space hunter-killer squadrons using the new stealth frigates. Gravitational mines eliminated approximately 60% of their formation before the survivors attempted to retreat. Chen's forces pursued and eliminated the remaining ships. No survivors." Mitchell turned back to the viewport, where the final phases of the battle were playing out among the asteroids. The Zephyrian 7th Fleet, which had entered the system with enough firepower to sterilize an entire planet, was now reduced to scattered debris and expanding clouds of gas. In less than 2 hours, humanity had eliminated more alien military assets than the previous 50 years of border conflicts combined. But, more importantly, they had demonstrated a fundamental shift in human military thinking. The species that had once followed galactic law so carefully that other races used them as mediators in diplomatic disputes had revealed their capacity for total war. "Final enemy vessel eliminated," Torres reported. "Harmony system is secure. Total enemy casualties, 47,000 military personnel. Human losses, 37 personnel across all participating vessels." The numbers were staggering. A 47-37 kill ratio against a numerically superior enemy represented a level of tactical excellence that redefined expectations about human military capability. But Mitchell knew the real victory wasn't in the numbers. The real victory was in the message they had just sent to every species in the galaxy. Humanity had demonstrated that they possessed both the technological capability and the psychological willingness to engage in warfare without limits. The civilized, law-abiding humans who had sought peaceful coexistence with their alien neighbors were gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. "Colonel," Torres said quietly, "what do we do about the monitoring stations?" Long-range sensors indicate at least a dozen alien species had observation posts watching this engagement. Mitchell considered the question carefully. Those monitoring stations will be transmitting detailed records of the battle to their home governments within hours. The footage of human ships systematically eliminating escape pods would spread throughout the galactic community, probably reaching the Galactic Council within days. "Let them watch," she decided. "Let them see exactly what we're capable of when someone decides to target our civilians. Maybe the next species that considers attacking human colonies will think twice about the consequences." She activated the fleet-wide communication system, preparing to address every human ship in the system. "All vessels, this is Colonel Mitchell. Operation Righteous Fury has been completed successfully. Today, we have demonstrated to our enemies that human patience has limits, and that crossing those limits carries a price beyond their imagination." Mitchell paused, looking out at the debris field that had once been a Zephyrian fleet. The aliens who planned to murder 12 million innocent humans learned today that we protect our own. Every species watching this engagement learned that humanity is no longer bound by rules that our enemies ignore. And the Zephyrian Empire learned that they picked the wrong species to start this war with. The cheers that echoed across the communication channels reflected the mood of every human military unit in known space. For too long, they had watched their enemies break the rules while humanity struggled to maintain moral high ground. Now, finally, they were free to demonstrate what humans could accomplish when they stopped trying to be civilized. The War of No Quarter had begun in earnest, and humanity intended to finish it on their own terms. 6 months after the simultaneous destruction of 3 Zephyrian fleets, General Marcus Kane stood before the assembled delegates of the Galactic Council in what had once been considered the most secure location in known space. The Council chamber on Nexus Prime had hosted diplomatic negotiations between hundreds of species for over 2 centuries, its neutral territory providing a safe haven for even the most bitter enemies to attempt peaceful resolution of their conflicts. Today, it felt more like a courtroom where humanity was being tried for crimes against the established order. General Kane, High Counselor Veldar of the Andromedan Collective, spoke with the careful precision of a being who had spent decades mediating between different species. This council has reviewed the evidence of human military actions against the Zephyrian Empire over the past 6 months. The systematic elimination of entire fleets, the targeting of escape pods, the use of weapons of mass destruction against civilian installations. These actions represent a fundamental violation of every principle this council has worked to establish. Kane listened impassively, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the assembled representatives. 47 different species were represented in the chamber, from the crystalline Shadari to the gaseous entities of the Nebula Collective. Each one was looking at him with expressions that ranged from fear to outrage to barely concealed hatred. He was fine with that. Fear was more useful than respect when it came to protecting human interests. High Counselor, Kane replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. I noticed that your review of recent events began with human military actions against the Zephyrian Empire. I'm curious why it didn't begin with the Zephyrian massacre of 43,000 innocent civilians on New Haven. A ripple of discomfort passed through the chamber. Several delegates shifted in their seats or displayed whatever species-appropriate signs of unease they possessed. The New Haven massacre had been the catalyst for everything that followed, but most species seemed eager to avoid discussing the details of what had actually triggered humanity's transformation. The incident at New Haven was unfortunate, Veldar acknowledged, but it was within the bounds of recognized military doctrine under the Galactic Accords. Civilian casualties in military operations, while regrettable, do not justify the complete abandonment of civilized warfare. Kane's laugh was harsh and without humor. 43,000 dead civilians was within the bounds of civilized warfare. Children murdered in their beds, families burned alive in their homes, escape shuttles targeted specifically to prevent survivors. He stepped closer to the council podium, and several delegates visibly flinched. Tell me, High Counselor, how many of your own people would need to die before you decided that civilized warfare was a contradiction in terms? General Kane, interrupted Ambassador Kexmaron of the Hegemony Worlds, you cannot seriously suggest that the systematic annihilation of enemy forces without quarter represents a legitimate response to a single military operation. A single military operation? Kane's voice rose with genuine anger. The Zephyrians didn't stop at New Haven, Ambassador. Our intelligence indicates they were planning to exterminate the populations of 3 major human colonies. 12 million civilians marked for death as a demonstration of imperial authority. He gestured toward the tactical display that dominated one wall of the chamber. We prevented those massacres by eliminating the fleets that were tasked with carrying them out. If that makes us monsters in your eyes, so be it. The tactical display showed the current military situation across human and Zephyrian space. Where 6 months ago the map had shown a rough balance of forces, it now depicted the systematic collapse of the Zephyrian Empire. Entire star systems have been abandoned as Imperial forces retreated toward their core worlds, pursued by human fleets that showed no interest in taking prisoners or accepting surrenders. The complete destruction of the Zephyrian military represents a level of violence unprecedented in galactic history, observed Counselor Ithmex of the Crystalline Concordat. Your forces have eliminated over 2,000 enemy vessels and approximately 6 million Imperial personnel. The scale of death is disturbing. Kane nodded thoughtfully. It is disturbing, almost as disturbing as the realization that for decades, humanity accepted restrictions on our military capabilities, while our enemies operated under no such limitations. The Zephyrians murdered our civilians with impunity because they knew we would respond proportionally, following rules they felt free to ignore whenever convenient. He activated the display, showing footage from the battle at Harmony Prime. When we demonstrated that we could play by their rules better than they could, when we showed them what unrestricted warfare actually looked like, the entire balance of power in this region shifted overnight. And that shift has destabilized the entire galactic order, Veldar stated firmly. Your actions have created a precedent that threatens every diplomatic agreement, every trade arrangement, every peaceful relationship between species. If others follow your example, then maybe those who consider murdering civilians will think twice before acting on those impulses, Kane interrupted. For centuries, the Galactic Accords have protected aggressor species by limiting the responses their victims could mount. The strong preyed on the weak because they knew retaliation would be measured and proportional. We've eliminated that protection. Kane moved to stand directly before the High Counselor's platform, his presence dominating the chamber in a way that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. At 53, the general carried himself with the confidence of a man who had fundamentally altered the strategic balance of an entire galaxy. His gray hair and lined face spoke of the stress of the past months, but his eyes held the unwavering determination of someone who had made peace with necessary choices. Let me be absolutely clear about humanity's position, Kane continued. We didn't start this war. We didn't choose to abandon the Galactic Accords. But when the Zephyrian Empire decided that human lives were expendable, they forced us to demonstrate that Zephyrian lives were equally expendable. The only difference is that we're better at making that demonstration than they were. Ambassador Kexmaron stood from his seat, his species' natural height advantage allowing him to tower over even Kane's considerable frame. General, your actions have created a situation where other species fear humanity more than any enemy they have ever faced. The technological superiority you've demonstrated, combined with your apparent willingness to use those advantages without restriction, has fundamentally altered the balance of power in this galaxy. Good, Kane replied simply. For too long, humanity has been treated as a junior partner in galactic affairs. Our colonies were considered acceptable targets for demonstrations of power. Our trade routes were subject to interdiction whenever it served someone else's political purposes. Our diplomatic protests were ignored because everyone knew we would never escalate beyond filing formal complaints. Kane gestured toward the tactical display again, where red indicators showed the current positions of human fleets throughout the region. That era is over. Humanity is no longer interested in being anyone's junior partner. We are no longer willing to accept restrictions on our responses to aggression. And we are no longer concerned about maintaining the approval of species who remained silent while our civilians were murdered. The silence in the chamber was profound. Several delegates were engaged in what appeared to be urgent consultations with their home governments via quantum communication arrays. The implications of Kane's statement extended far beyond the current conflict with the Zephyrian Empire. High Counselor Veldar finally spoke, his voice carefully modulated to avoid any hint of the growing alarm that was spreading through the chamber. General Kane, what assurances can you provide that human military forces will return to compliance with galactic law once the current conflict is resolved? Kane's smile was cold and predatory. High Counselor, the current conflict will be resolved when every Zephyrian military asset has been eliminated and their government formally surrenders unconditionally. At that point, humanity will be happy to discuss our future relationship with the galactic community. And if they refuse to surrender, then we'll eliminate their government and install one more amenable to peaceful coexistence. Kane's tone suggested he was discussing something as mundane as trade negotiations. The Zephyrian Empire has demonstrated that it cannot be trusted to honor agreements or respect the sovereignty of other species. If they choose extinction over surrender, we'll accommodate that choice. The chamber erupted in multiple simultaneous conversations as delegates realized the true scope of human intentions. Ambassador Kexmaron stood again, his voice cutting through the chaos. General Kane, you are describing the complete conquest of an entire star-spanning empire. The subjugation of billions of beings. The violation of every principle of species sovereignty that this council has upheld for centuries. I'm describing the consequences of murdering human civilians, Kane corrected. The Zephyrians chose this path when they decided that genocide was an acceptable tool of statecraft. We're simply following that path to its logical conclusion. Counselor Ithmex's crystalline form reflected the chamber's lights in patterns that indicated extreme agitation. And what of other species, General? What assurances do we have that humanity will not apply these same methods to future conflicts? Kane considered the question with the deliberate care of someone making a policy statement that would be analyzed by intelligence services across the galaxy. The answer to that question is simple, counselor. Don't target human civilians. Don't threaten human colonies. Don't violate human sovereignty. Follow those guidelines, and you'll find humanity to be a reasonable neighbor interested in peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. And if we don't, the general's smile became genuinely terrifying. Then, you'll discover what the Zephyrians learned. That when humanity decides to abandon restraint, we become very good at being unrestricted. Kane activated a new display showing real-time footage from the ongoing siege of the Zephyrian home system. Human fleets had surrounded the core worlds of the Empire, systematically eliminating defensive installations while avoiding civilian targets. The message was clear: surrender or watch your entire civilization be dismantled piece by piece. 12 hours ago, the Zephyrian High Command transmitted an offer to negotiate a ceasefire, Kane announced. They proposed returning to the status quo before New Haven, with minor border adjustments to address their security concerns. His expression made clear what he thought of that proposal. I declined to forward their message to my government. The Zephyrian Empire will surrender unconditionally, or it will cease to exist. Those are the only options remaining. High Counselor Veldar made one final attempt at diplomatic intervention. General Kane, surely there must be some middle ground, some compromise that addresses legitimate security concerns while avoiding the complete destruction of an established galactic power. Kane turned to face the full assembly of delegates, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. High Counselor, 6 months ago, I knelt beside the body of an 8-year-old girl who died because the Zephyrian Empire wanted to send humanity a message about our place in the galactic order. Today, I'm sending them a message about their place in a galaxy where humanity no longer tolerates threats to our civilians. He moved toward the chamber's exit, then paused to address the assembly one final time. To those species represented here who have maintained peaceful relations with humanity, I want to be clear that nothing has changed in our relationship. We remain committed to honoring our agreements and respecting your sovereignty. Kane's gaze swept across the chamber, lingering on the delegates from species that had remained neutral during the current conflict. But to those who might consider testing our resolve, who might think that our transformation represents weakness or uncertainty, I offer this counsel. Learn from the Zephyrian example. Study the tactical recordings from our recent engagements. Understand what happens when a species that has spent decades restraining itself decides that restraint is no longer serving its interests. The general strode from the chamber, leaving behind an assembly of delegates who were struggling to comprehend the fundamental shift in galactic politics that had just been announced. Humanity had transformed from a peaceful, law-abiding species into the single most dangerous military power in known space, and they had done it in less than 6 months. In the weeks that followed Kane's address to the Galactic Council, the Zephyrian Empire formally surrendered. Their core worlds were occupied by human forces, their government disbanded, and their military completely eliminated. The process was carried out with mechanical efficiency that impressed even longtime observers of galactic warfare. But the real change wasn't in the fate of one aggressive empire. The real change was in the way every other species began approaching their relationships with humanity. Trade agreements were renegotiated in humanity's favor. Territorial disputes were resolved through human arbitration. Border conflicts that had simmered for decades were suddenly settled when both sides realized that escalation might draw human attention. Humanity had discovered that being feared was far more effective than being respected when it came to protecting their interests. And once that lesson was learned, there was no going back to the days when human civilians could be murdered without consequence. The galaxy had entered a new age, one where the rules were written by those willing to enforce them without mercy. And humanity had proven they were very good at writing new rules.